It's time that we give Indiana football the respect that they deserve. The Hoosiers are 7-0, 4-0 in Big Ten play. They're ranked 13th, and this Saturday at noon Eastern Time, they host the Washington Huskies on Big Ten Network, favored by 6.5 points, in spite of the fact that their starting quarterback, Curtis Rourke, who's been top 5 in the nation in quarterback efficiency, is out. The Hoosiers have played FIU, Western Illinois, UCLA, Charlotte, Maryland, Northwestern, and Nebraska. Yes, a cakewalk schedule that does not even rank inside the top 100. However, they beat FIU 31-7, Western Illinois 77-3, UCLA on the road 42-13, Charlotte at home 52-14, Maryland at home 42-28, overcoming a -4 or -5 turnover margin. They still won by double digits. Against Northwestern, they won 41-24, and against Nebraska, they won 56-7. 56-7. One of the best performances by an individual team all season long, blowing the Cornhuskers out of the water, playing near flawlessly on offense and pretty good defense. Curt Cignetti is building a monster. They're scoring 48.7 points per game, and they're only allowing 13.7. And I want to give you some reasons why, in spite of this week's schedule, that Indiana may just be not just a great team, not just a Cinderella team, not just a near elite team, but they could be a legitimately elite team this year. Let's dive in. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below. Do you think Indiana is legit or not? Share this video around to other college football fans. Join our Discord server where we talk football 24/7. There's even Indiana fans, I think more than one, in our Discord server, and we're close to 100 members. We're trying to get to 1,000 members in our Discord server by the end of the season so that we can be talking college football every day, 24/7, because college football is the greatest sport in the world, and I love talking about it. I know you love talking about it. So just do that. It's simple. It's free to join the Discord server. You don't need to be a Patreon page member or payment of any kind. You can just join it for free via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. If you do want to donate to the channel and support the work we do here, you can sign up as a Patreon member or purchase merchandise from our merchandise store. The links to those are in the description and down below in the pinned comment, just like the link to the Discord server. And also in the pinned comment, there is a link to my Indiana versus Washington preview and prediction video that I highly recommend you check out if you have not already. But thank you so much for liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, commenting, and enjoying the content that we make here. I appreciate your support a lot. But Indiana, I think they're a legit football team. And I kind of caught on to that fact when they played Maryland, because to lead 42-21 in any game against a Big Ten opponent when you've given up 4 turnovers and your opponent has had none, and they have a 75-yard run, and they've put together some drives, that's impressive, to say the least. That's very impressive. And then to do what they did against Northwestern, which I thought was somewhat of a trap game because Northwestern, well, I guess the term for it is they're scrappy. They're well coached. They'll take advantage of mistakes. And I thought to myself, if Indiana really is just puffed up, they could lose this game. But they scored 41 points. Yes, they allowed 24. Indiana's defense is not the best defense in the country, but I do think it is a good defense with some flaws. Their offense, however, as we saw against Nebraska, Northwestern, Maryland, they've scored north of 40 in every game except their first game of the season against Florida International. And given that they're made up of a lot of transfer players, I think that it's reasonable to say that the longer this team plays together, the more chemistry they'll build. They're going to iron out kinks on both sides of the football because of all the new production coming in, all the new transfer players, etc. And I think you saw that against Nebraska, where they looked the best they have all season long, and you're in the middle of the year. You're in Game 7, and a lot of teams get worse as the season goes on. They don't get better. So I think that's sign number one, I guess, that Indiana is a legit football team, that they could be one of the better teams in the country. But a lot of that is eye test, anecdotal, and again, they haven't played a top 100 strength of schedule, and Nebraska's not a top 25 team. So let me give you some other numbers. And I think numbers that suggest that Curt Cignetti has, as I said on my Twitter page, Deion Sanders brought Louis Vuitton to Colorado, but Curt Cignetti brought a whole Spetsnaz unit. He brought Black Ops players. He brought a Navy SEAL unit. Deion Sanders did, I think, an impressive job last season and this season in the preseason of overhauling Colorado's roster, bringing them from 1-11 and getting blown out every week to 4-8 and competitive in most of their games to now they're 5-2 and they may finish ranked at the end of the season. They may be a top 25 team. That's impressive. Indiana, in year one, overhauled their roster with players who were not as flashy. There is not a Travis Hunter on the roster, no number one player in high school recruiting rankings on this roster, and yet they are scoring 0.647 points per play. They're scoring they have a 0.406 points per play margin. They're top 5 in both of those categories. They only need 10.9 yards to score 1 point. That's awesome special teams play, awesome defensive play to force some turnovers, short fields, get some stops, and also ruthless offensive efficiency, because yes, they have short fields, but this also means that they don't often fail on fourth down or come up empty, and they often score touchdowns on their drives. Special teams, defense, yards per point and points per play margin, they don't tell you the exact same thing, and I think points per play margin is much more indicative of how elite a team is compared to yards per point margin. Like Iowa has always been high in yards per point margin because they have really good special teams, but they're still good indicators, both of them. And I think it's fascinating when you look at some data that I'm going to show you in a few minutes that shows you the type of teams that Indiana is placed with. Not just this year, which is a very chaotic year, but also historically, with some teams that did very well and also started off with soft schedules. Indiana's averaging 7.1 yards per play. They only allow 0.241 opponent points per play, and their opponents only average 4.4 yards per play on their defense. I mean, this is a dominant football team. Indiana has a quarterback in Curtis Rourke, who right now has a 188.7 passer rating. Taven Jackson is a 226.7 passer rating. Indiana's thrown 18 touchdowns all season to 3 interceptions. They've only allowed 7 sacks on the year, an average of 1 sack allowed per game. They're averaging 10.8 passing yards per attempt. They're completing 73.3% of their passes. Rourke on the year has a QBR that is a 91.8, second nationally, I think only behind either Army or Navy's quarterback. Indiana on the ground is averaging 5.3 yards per carry with 28 rushing touchdowns, and they're averaging 14.7 yards per completion. Their kicker is 4 of 4. Defensively, they have 21 sacks, 21 passes defended, 7 interceptions, 7 forced fumbles, and 5 fumble recoveries. This is a disciplined team, a scrappy team. They're very well coached, and they have underrated talent here. This isn't just because of coaching and genius schematics. In large part it is, but you have some players like Rourke and Surratt and center Mike Caddick and some others on the offensive line, and some, I think, even players on defense that do play like they are blue chippers, even though they are not. So also a good job of talent evaluation by the staff and of execution by the players. But I want to further dive in to some numbers here. When you look at teams from last season, Indiana, keep in mind this year, has a 0.406 points per play margin. There are only 3 other teams that are above 0.4 points per play margin. Those are Army and Navy, so 2 service academies, and Ohio State. That's it. Now, that's not to say that Texas, Notre Dame, Ole Miss, UNLV, Alabama, Oregon, Tennessee, Penn State, Boise State, BYU, James Madison, Clemson, Miami, Southern Methodist, and Jacksonville State, teams that are above 0.2, that they can't string together some good performances and move up the chart. But over the previous over the past few seasons, when you look at, well, points per play margin, in 2023, the national champion, Michigan, had 0.399 points per play margin. In 2022, the national champion in Georgia had 0.357 points per play margin. In 2021, Georgia had a 0.43 points per play margin. That was a very dominant team for having one bad loss. Alabama had a 0.418 points per play margin in 2020, national champion. Alabama actually led the nation in points per play margin in 2019 with a 0.407. LSU, the national champion, was still above 0.3, though. They had a 0.315 points per play margin. Clemson at 0.386. Ohio State at 0.39 points per play margin. That was the first time that I've given you a team that won the national title without being number one in points per play margin. And all of these teams have been inside the top four. Let's go back a little bit further. In 2018, Clemson had a 0.415 points per play margin. They were the national champion. They led the nation there. Alabama won it all in 2017. They had a 0.343 points per play margin, and they were first in that category. They won it all. In 2016, Clemson was actually fairly low. They won it all with a 0.185 points per play margin. 2016 national champion. Alabama, who was the runner-up and favored to win the title for much of the year, had a 0.345 points per play margin, and they were the national runner-up in 16. In 15, I'll go all the way back to 14 and then be done here. In 15, the leader in points per play margin was Ohio State with a 0.303. The national champion in 15 was Alabama with a 0.218 points per play margin. And in 2014, Ohio State, the national champion, had a 0.290 points per play margin. They were third. They won it all. So typically, you have to be top 5 in points per play margin to win it all. You have to be, with the exception of Clemson, top 10, top 5 if you count out the teams before 2017. Really, since 2017 up until now, the team who's number one in points per play margin is going to win the national champion. Now, it fluctuates, of course, game to game. It's number one at the end of the season, typically is number one in the polls and winning it all when you look at points per play margin versus who wins the national title, who wins the college football playoff. It's just something interesting to look at, and points per play margin really measures efficiency and dominance without necessarily factoring in strength of schedule. But strength of schedule always solves itself out. And as for Indiana, likely that will come against Ohio State when they play them on November 23rd. About 30 days, about a month away from today's date. But let's look at some teams who, over the past 3 seasons, were around Indiana's ballpark in points per play margin on this exact date, on October 24th. Today, Thursday, October 24th, Indiana, in points per play margin, they have a 0.406. They are fourth. Last year, this time, October 24th of 2023, the only team that had a higher points per play margin than what I just listed was Michigan with 0.548 points per play margin. They also played a Charmin soft schedule, but they were very good. I think for all of last season, Michigan was pretty clearly the number one team in the nation, outside of the week where Georgia plastered Kentucky at home or where Georgia plastered Ole Miss at home. Those were some of the few exceptions to the norm, where normally week after week after week, Michigan, whether they beat their opponents by 20 or by 40, looked like the nation's most complete and efficient football team. Other teams that were above 0.3 in points per play margin this time last season were Oregon, Penn State, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Florida State, and Washington. Now, most of those schools, if not all of them, perhaps even including Michigan, played a tougher strength of schedule up to that point. But all of those teams finished ranked inside of the top 15. All of them. And Penn State, for example, in 2023, they only played Ohio State up to that point. That was really the only good team with a comparative pulse that played them. And the Iowa team they shut out 31-0 is not as good as this Indiana team. Michigan in 2023, up to that point, the toughest opponent they had played was probably Nebraska or Minnesota on the road, or maybe Rutgers or Bowling Green at home. So yeah, pretty Charmin soft schedule. Ohio State last year, the toughest opponent they played up until that point was Penn State at home. You could also say Notre Dame on the road. So not super comparative, but if you were to have Indiana play a tougher strength of schedule, well, they'd probably drop down to the 0.3, lower 0.3 points per play margin like Ohio State was last season. And Georgia last year, up until this point, October 24th of 2023, the toughest opponent they played was either Auburn on the road or Kentucky at home. And they had a points per play margin of 0.287. And Georgia last year, while being much worse than the 2021 and 2022 teams, was still a near elite team. Very good. Could have won the national title. You look back even further in 2022, up until this point, October 24th of 2022, the only teams that were above 0.4 in points per play margin, like Indiana is right now, were Georgia, Michigan, and Ohio State. 3 of the 4 national title contenders, because those 3 teams reached the college football playoff, along with TCU, who's also top 10 at that point in points per play margin on October 24th of 2022. Tennessee, Alabama, Texas, USC, Penn State, and Western Kentucky were other teams in the top 10. Other teams above 0.3 were Alabama and Tennessee, but they weren't above 0.4. And then finally in 2021, the only teams above 0.4 in points per play margin on October 24th of 2021, like Indiana is this year on this date, were Georgia, Ohio State, Cincinnati, and Coastal Carolina. So not only have teams who don't fulfill the blue chip ratio, who aren't uber talented in terms of star ratings, not only have they been very dominant before, 2021 Cincinnati, 2022 Tennessee, 2022 Texas Christian wasn't very dominant, but they won a lot of football games. 2023 Washington fits this bill. They did not fulfill the blue chip ratio. Not only that, but Indiana is playing in terms of dominance in the same ballpark as like Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State teams of the last 2 to 3 seasons. I don't think they're as good as 2023 Michigan or 2023 Ohio State or 2022 Michigan or Ohio State. I don't know if they are as good as 2023 Penn State, though I would tend to side that they probably are. Just they're extremely good on offense and above average good on defense, and the inverse is true for Penn State last year. And maybe they are as good as 2023 Ohio State or as good as 2021 Michigan. I don't know exactly, and these things will solve itself out. However, the numbers tell you that Indiana is a very good team, extremely good. And the teams that I listed who were above 0.4 in points per play margin over the previous several seasons at this point in October, many of them did not play tough strength of schedules, and they went on to achieve bigger and better things. Like although every national champion was in that ballpark of above 0.4. This should also give hope to Ohio State fans because they lead the Power 4 in points per play margin. They're a very dominant team. So if you're an Ohio State fan watching this, a points per play margin tells you that you're going to win it all at this point. But again, we'll have to wait and see. Indiana is, they're electric, they're scoring a ton of points, they're very efficient, and they're fundamentally sound. They have not trailed all season long like Michigan teams in the past, Ohio State teams of the past, Georgia teams of the past, and they have a plus 0.7 turnover margin per game. So even with some of their issues at turning over the ball like they had against Maryland, they're still finding ways to win the turnover battle. And winning the turnover battle, playing dominant football, and winning your games and improving as the weeks go on, those are indicators of a college football playoff contender, of a national champion contender. I am not going to sit here and tell you that Indiana is going to win it all. They have the 109th strength of schedule. They have not played anyone. Plus, the blue chip ratio is a rule for a reason. Bud Elliott is no no dumb or dull individual. I love listening to him. He's smarter than I am. He's been in the business for a while. There's a reason the blue chip ratio, despite being so simple, works. You need blue chip talent and depth to win it all. But what I can tell you is Indiana is playing like it could be an exception to that rule by what I'm seeing, because they are fourth in game control, they are fifth in total efficiency, they're fourth in points per play margin, they're scoring over 0.6 points per play. This is a legit team, and it's time that we took the Indiana Hoosiers seriously. Jump on the train before it's too late. I jumped on the train in terms of this team at least being good, great, being top 20, top 15. I would say around the Maryland Northwestern game before they played Nebraska. Now I'm telling you, jump on the train that this is a top 10 team and a legitimate threat to pull off a win in the college football playoff, and they're likely going to reach the college football playoff. Thank you all so much for watching the studio. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Little OH for being Heisman members. And thanks to Chris Lee and Ismar and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And also thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Seal, Austin Christmas, and Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being all conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone, and go Hoosiers. Hopefully Curt Cignetti gets a massive paycheck at the end of the year, because it's good to see these teams, these smaller teams, outperform the bigger Blue Bloods.